Most artists try to make a portrait look realistic by adding more detail, but realism isn't about adding more. It's about knowing what to build, what to leave untouched, and when to stop. I'm Ben, and in this tutorial, I'll show you exactly how I approach a realistic portrait, step by step. Getting a clean portrait stencil starts with one important step. Let me show you exactly how I apply and transfer my stencil without losing the important details. For the stencil, I start by applying a small amount of dedicated tattoo stencil solution to the skin. You don't need a lot of solution. A thin, even layer is enough. Then I gently go over the entire stencil with a clean tissue. The key here is to use very light pressure. Don't rub aggressively or press too hard because you can move the stencil and lose important details. This is especially important with portrait tattoos because small details in the eyes, nose, lips, and hair need to transfer clearly. After transferring the stencil, I use a hairdryer to dry it for about 3 to 5 minutes. Keep the airflow controlled and avoid overheating the skin. There's one more important step. After a few minutes, I completely remove the remaining stencil from the skin. Don't leave the stencil sitting on the skin for too long. The longer it stays, the harder it can become to remove, and it can leave a stronger, more persistent stencil mark. Once it's cleaned off, I have a clean surface with the important design details clearly visible, ready to start the tattoo. Before mixing the Greywash, make sure to shake both the black and white ink bottles well so the pigments are properly mixed. For the first cup, I add 1 drop of black ink. For the second cup, 3 drops. For the third cup, 5 drops. For the fourth cup, 7 drops. And for the fifth cup, 13 drops of black ink. Then I add 5 drops of white ink to cups 1 through 4. I leave the fifth cup without white to keep it as the darkest shade. Next, I add 7 drops of color mixing solution and 5 drops of special shading solution to each cup. For synthetic skin, I filled the remaining space with water, but for real skin, don't use water. Fill the cups with special shading solution instead. This setup gives me a smooth range of Greywash shades that I can build up gradually throughout the tattoo. Now let's go over my machine settings for starting the hair. I'm using 6.5 volts with a 3.0 millimeter stroke. For the needle, I'm using a 3RL with the needle extending about 2 to 3 millimeters from the cartridge. These are the settings I'm using to start the hair in this portrait. Keep in mind that these settings are based on my own machine and hand speed. Alright, for this next step, we're staying with Greywash cup number 1 and beginning the foundation of the hair. At this stage, I'm not focused on creating finished hair strands or strong contrast. My goal is to establish the structure, flow, rhythm, and movement of the hair so I have a clear roadmap for everything that comes later. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is becoming obsessed with individual hair strands too early. They start drawing random lines everywhere because they think realism comes from detail. In reality, realism starts with control. Before you can create believable strands, you need to understand the larger shapes, the direction of growth, the volume of the hair, and how the different sections interact with one another. This is exactly why I'm starting with Greywash cup number 1. The light value gives me freedom. It allows me to explore the structure without committing to dark values too soon. If I notice something that needs adjustment, I still have room to correct it. Once dark values are placed, your options become much more limited. As I work through these areas, I'm constantly studying the waves, bends, overlaps, recesses, and raised sections throughout the hair. Hair is not flat, it behaves like a landscape. Some sections move toward the viewer, some move away, some overlap, and some disappear into shadow. Understanding these larger forms is far more important than drawing individual strands. One thing that many artists underestimate is how much planning is required before the hair even begins to look like hair. What you're seeing here is not random shading. Every stroke is helping build a roadmap that will guide the entire process later. If the roadmap is wrong, the final result will feel confusing no matter how clean the details are. When working on portrait hair, I am constantly asking myself several questions. Where is this section growing from? Where is it traveling? Is it moving toward light or shadow? Is it sitting on top of another section? Is it disappearing behind another form? These questions help maintain logic throughout the design. A very important point to understand is that this type of realistic hair should never be approached like a solid black traditional hair shape. Many artists see a dark area and immediately fill it with black. That approach destroys the realism. Realistic portrait hair is much more complex than that. Even when hair appears dark, there are still subtle value shifts, texture changes, reflected light, overlapping layers, and countless transitions happening inside those dark areas. If you simply pack everything with solid black, the hair loses its depth and starts looking flat, heavy, and artificial. This is one of the reasons why realistic hair takes so much patience. You're not just tattooing hair, you're creating the illusion of thousands of individual elements working together as one structure. Every section affects the sections around it. The truth is that this kind of hair work requires a tremendous amount of time, concentration, precision, and patience. There are very few shortcuts. If you rush the process, the viewer will immediately notice. Hair is one of the easiest areas for mistakes to become visible because the human eye is naturally very sensitive to flow, rhythm, and pattern recognition.
A common beginner mistake is becoming impatient and trying to force contrast too early. They want the hair to look finished within a few minutes. Unfortunately, realism doesn't work that way. The best portrait hair is built gradually through many controlled layers. Think of this stage as laying the foundation of a building. Nobody sees the foundation when the building is complete, but if it's poorly constructed, the entire structure suffers. The same principle applies here. Another reason I'm using a 3RL for this stage instead of starting with an RM is precision. The 3RL allows me to carefully establish direction, movement, and separation between different sections of hair. It gives me greater control while I'm building the roadmap. Many artists switch to larger needles too early because they want faster coverage. Speed is not always your friend. Sometimes slowing down and maintaining control produces a much better result than covering large areas quickly. The 3RL lets me follow the natural flow of the hair and place information exactly where I need it. Once the structure is established and I know the design is moving in the right direction, I can introduce an RM later to help build larger shadow masses, smoother transitions, and additional volume. In other words, the 3RL helps me organize the design. The RM helps me develop the design. Pay close attention to my hand movement throughout this process. My hand is constantly following the direction of the hair flow. I'm not forcing straight strokes into curved sections, and I'm not fighting against the movement of the reference. Hair has a natural rhythm. If your hand movement ignores that rhythm, the viewer will subconsciously notice something feels wrong, even if they can't explain why. Another critical factor is machine angle. Many beginners focus only on the needle, but the angle of the machine influences the character of every stroke. Maintaining consistent angle helps create cleaner and more predictable textures. As the flow changes, my wrist and hand position change with it. I'm constantly adapting to the design instead of forcing the design to adapt to me. One of the biggest do's in this stage is learning to trust light values. Many artists panic when they don't immediately see strong contrast. They assume nothing is happening because the greywash is light. In reality, this light layer is doing an enormous amount of work. It is establishing structure, direction, volume, and future placement for all the darker values that will come later. One of the biggest don'ts is trying to create darkness by increasing pressure. Never confuse pressure with value. Darkness comes from layering, density, and proper value control. It does not come from forcing the needle deeper into the skin. The harder you push, the greater the chance of damaging the skin and creating rough transitions. Instead, focus on consistency. Use a light touch. Allow the machine to work. Let the values build naturally. Something else I want you to pay attention to is how often I stop and evaluate the overall design. I'm not blindly following individual strands. I'm constantly checking balance, flow, proportion, and movement. Professional artists spend a surprising amount of time looking and thinking. Many beginners spend too much time tattooing and not enough time observing. Observation is one of the most important skills in realism. The better your observation becomes, the better your decision-making becomes. As this foundation continues to develop, I'm already thinking several steps ahead. I'm considering where the darkest values will eventually live, where the highlights will remain untouched, and how the different sections of hair will interact with each other once additional layers are added. Every stroke I'm placing now is making future stages easier. That's why patience matters so much. That's why planning matters so much. And that's why realistic portrait hair cannot be rushed. Take your time. Trust the process. Trust the light value of cup number 1. Build the roadmap carefully. Follow the natural flow of the hair. Respect the structure underneath. Then, when the time comes to introduce darker values and stronger contrast, you'll have a solid foundation that supports every decision moving forward. This stage may not look dramatic, but it is one of the most important stages in the entire portrait. A strong foundation here will make the final result cleaner, more realistic, more natural, and ultimately far more convincing.
Alright, now that I've finished the initial work with the 3RL, I'm switching to a 5RM for the next stage of the hair. For this stage, I'm keeping the same gray wash from cup number 1, but I'm changing the machine setup to suit the 5RM. I'm running the machine at 6.5 volts with a 2.5 millimeter stroke, and I have the needle hanging approximately 2 to 3 millimeters from the cartridge. These are my personal settings for this machine, my hand speed, and the way I'm working with this particular needle. They are not universal settings, so always remember these settings are approximate and are meant to give you a starting point so you can adjust them higher or lower based on your machine and hand speed. Now we're moving into a different part of the hair building process. With the 3RL, I established the initial roadmap and started defining the direction and important features of the hair. With the 5RM, I can now begin developing those shapes with more body and softness, while still working with the light value of cup number 1. I'm looking at the hair as a collection of larger forms, rather than treating the entire area as one solid mass. Pay attention to the waves here. Every wave has a high point, a turning point, and a lower area. Some parts catch the light, while other parts naturally fall into shadow. There are raised sections, recessed sections, overlapping areas, and spaces where the hair changes direction. Those changes are what give the hair its three-dimensional appearance. So as I'm working, I'm not simply moving the needle from one side to the other. I'm following the structure that I've already mapped out and using the gray wash to start giving those structures some weight. This is where the 5RM becomes very useful for me. I can use it to soften and build larger transitions, but I can also use controlled movements with the edge and smaller portions of the grouping to create certain hair texture and individual strands. So don't think that a magnum can only be used for broad shading. The way you position and move the needle can completely change the type of information you're putting into the tattoo. For some areas, I want a softer and wider contact with the skin to establish the body of the hair. In other areas, I'll use a more controlled edge of the grouping and a directional movement to help create individual hair strokes. The important thing is that I'm not using the same movement everywhere. If I used exactly the same movement, pressure, speed, and contact across the entire head, the hair would start to look repetitive. And repetition is one of the biggest enemies of realistic texture. Real hair has rhythm, but it doesn't have perfect repetition. Some strands are longer, some are shorter, some disappear into the shadow, some catch the light, some overlap another section, some become almost invisible in the surrounding value. That variation is what makes the texture believable. So when I'm working with the 5RM here, I'm constantly changing the character of the movement according to the section I'm working on. I also want you to notice that I'm not trying to make every hair equally visible.
This is very important. If every strand has the same darkness, the same length, the same sharpness, and the same amount of detail, the hair will immediately look artificial. You need hierarchy. Some areas should carry more information. Some areas should remain softer. Some strands should be clearly visible. Others should almost disappear into the surrounding value. This difference in clarity creates depth. The viewer's eye naturally moves toward areas with stronger contrast and clearer detail, so I don't want to make the entire hair equally sharp. Instead, I decide where I want the attention to go. This is also why I'm still using Greywash cup number 1. I don't need maximum darkness at this stage. I'm trying to establish information that I can build on later. A light value gives me much more freedom. If I make something slightly too dark at this stage, I have already reduced my ability to create separation later. But if I keep this layer controlled, I can always come back and increase the value. That's one of the most important principles in realism. It's much easier to build value gradually than to remove value that you've already put in. This is especially important with hair, because the design depends heavily on the relationship between dark areas and untouched or lighter areas. If everything becomes dark, the hair loses its internal light. You need those lighter spaces. You need those gaps. You need those areas where the light can breathe. These lighter areas aren't empty. They are part of the design. In fact, sometimes the negative space between two darker sections does more to create the appearance of a hair strand than actually tattooing another dark line. So don't feel that every empty area needs to be filled. Some of the most important decisions you're making are actually decisions about what not to tattoo. Now, let's talk about the movement of the hand. When I'm creating these hair patterns, my hand isn't moving randomly. I'm following the direction that the hair is already taking. If the section curves upward, my movement follows that curve. If it bends around a larger form, I allow my hand and wrist to follow that change. I'm not trying to force the machine into a straight mechanical path. The tattoo machine is a tool. The hand is what creates the direction, and the reference is what determines that direction.
Another important point is the angle. You don't want to think only about where the needle starts. You also need to think about where the stroke is going and where you want it to disappear. A good hair stroke should have a beginning, a direction, and an ending. It shouldn't simply stop in the middle of nowhere. This is particularly important when creating fine hair texture. If a stroke ends abruptly, it can look like a drawn line. If it gradually disappears into the surrounding value, it starts to feel much more like natural hair. That's why I don't want every stroke to have the same ending. Some strokes can disappear into a shadow, some can fade into a lighter area, some can overlap another section, and some can remain visible because they're sitting on top of the hair mass and catching light. This is where observation becomes extremely important. Don't just look at the hair and think, I need to tattoo more lines. Instead, ask yourself, where is this section turning? Where is the light hitting? Where does the hair overlap? Where does the form disappear? Where does the shadow begin? Where should the next layer eventually connect? These questions help you make decisions instead of simply copying texture. Another mistake I want you to avoid is making the hair too uniform. If every wave has the same shape, every strand has the same distance, and every section has the same darkness, the result will look like a pattern. Realism should never look like a repeating pattern. Even when the hair has a clear direction, there should still be natural variation inside that direction. That's why I constantly change the length, spacing, density, and visibility of the strokes. But there is an important balance here. Variation does not mean randomness. That's a very important distinction. You don't want random hair strokes. You want controlled variation based on the reference. The strokes can vary, but they still need to belong to the same underlying structure. This is what makes the hair look natural rather than chaotic. Another thing I'm paying attention to is the relationship between the hair and the face underneath it. Because this is a portrait, the hair isn't an isolated object. It affects the silhouette of the face. It affects the forehead. It affects the temples. It affects how the light is perceived around the head. So the hair has to support the portrait rather than compete with it. If one section becomes
too dark or too sharp, it can pull attention away from the eyes and other important areas of the face. That's why value control is so important. The darkest areas should have a reason. Don't make something dark simply because the reference looks complicated. Understand why it's dark. Maybe it's because several sections of hair are overlapping. Maybe the light doesn't reach that area. Maybe the hair is turning away from the light. Maybe the section is sitting underneath another layer. Those are different situations, and they should not all be treated exactly the same. Now, let's talk about pressure. I'm still keeping my hand controlled and relatively light. I don't want to force the pigment into the skin just because I want to see a darker result immediately. More pressure is not a shortcut to realism. If I need more value, I can build it with another controlled pass. This is especially important when working with Greywash. A gradual build gives you more control over the final value and the transition. It also allows you to evaluate the tattoo as it develops instead of committing everything in one pass. One of the biggest mistakes at this stage is overworking an area simply because the artist doesn't think it's dark enough. You make a pass, you look at it, then you make another pass, then another, and suddenly the area has lost all of its softness. So, learn to stop, step back, look at the entire portrait. Don't judge only the small section directly underneath your needle. The hair might look too light when you're looking at it from 2 centimeters away, but when you look at the entire portrait, it may already have exactly the amount of information it needs. This is why working too close to the tattoo for too long can sometimes be misleading. You need to constantly switch between detail and the overall image. Another professional habit is checking the balance between your dark and light areas. If one section becomes much darker than everything around it, ask yourself whether that darkness actually exists in the reference or whether you've simply deposited too much pigment. This is where the Greywash gives me an advantage. I can build the image slowly and keep those decisions under control. Now, another important point about the R5M is that you shouldn't assume the needle automatically creates a smooth result just because it's a Magnum. The needle configuration is only part of the equation. Your hand movement, machine speed, angle, pressure, skin stretch, and how you overlap your passes all affect the final result. The same needle can produce very different results depending on how you use it. That's why I don't want you to copy only my voltage or my needle hang. Watch the way the needle is moving. Watch how fast my hand travels. Watch how I enter the shadow. Watch how I leave the shadow. Watch how much pressure I'm using. Those things are just as important as the equipment itself. And one more thing I want to emphasize is patience. This type of portrait hair is not something I want to rush. It has a lot of complexity. You're dealing with direction changes, overlapping sections, individual strands, larger forms, light and shadow, negative space, and subtle transitions all at the same time. That's a lot of information to control. So, if you're practicing this style, don't expect to master it by simply watching one tutorial. You need repetition, you need observation, you need to understand why a stroke goes where it goes, and most importantly, you need to develop the patience to build the image gradually. The goal isn't to make the hair look finished as quickly as possible. The goal is to make every layer support the next one. At this stage, I'm building the relationship between the larger hair masses and the smaller strands. The R5M gives me the ability to work across those forms while still creating controlled texture where I need it. Later, I can return with finer needle configurations and stronger values where the portrait needs more definition. But I don't want to solve every problem right now. That's another important lesson in realism. You don't have to finish everything the first time you touch it. Sometimes the best decision is to leave an area slightly unfinished because you know exactly what will happen to it in the next layer. Think ahead. Every layer should have a purpose. Right now, my purpose is to strengthen the hair structure, develop the volume, establish the soft transitions, and begin introducing the hair texture without losing the roadmap I created earlier. I'm not trying to make the hair completely dark. I'm not trying to make every strand visible, and I'm definitely not trying to rush through the area. I'm building it, I'm controlling it, and I'm leaving enough room for the next stages to make the portrait even stronger. That's the difference between simply putting hair texture into a tattoo and actually building realistic portrait hair.
Guys, if you haven't liked the video yet, make sure you hit the like button and leave a comment. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to create more tutorials for you. This is only part 1.
In the next part, we'll move on to the face and complete the portrait step by step. I'll explain the Greywash values, needles, techniques, final touches, machine angles, and the most important do's, don'ts, and common mistakes. Don't forget to check the description for links to the equipment I use and my discount code BENTATTOO for special savings on your next order. Subscribe if you haven't already, and go watch part 2 now. I'll see you in the next tutorial.